Legendary investor Ron Barron, the chairman and CEO of Barron Capital, is here with us this morning. According to Morningstar Direct, the Barron Partners Fund retail share class is ranked #1 out of more than 2,100 share classes since its conversion to a mutual fund nearly 20 years ago. We want to welcome Ron. And Ron, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you for being here on set with us.
Great to see you, and great to see you.
Great to see you.
So let's talk a little bit about what's happening with inflation, what's happening with the economy. As an investor, how you kind of add all of that up and figure out how things go from here.
So every morning, 6 to 7 o'clock, I work out and I watch you on television. And it's really entertaining for me. It doesn't make me change how I invest, but it is very entertaining, and it's nice to see the service you're providing to people and how it makes them aware of why stocks are going up and down in the short term. And so the big picture I take away is that I started Barron Capital in 1982. And since then, there's been 1 year where the news was good. 1 year, 1989. That was the year where they took down the wall between East and West Berlin, and we thought there was going to be a peace dividend and everything's going to be fine. 1 year. And all the other years, we have pandemics and wars and inflation and panics and crashes, everything. And what happens? The stock market is 800 when we start, and it's now 33,000, so 41 times. We've done much better than that, but 41 times in the face of all this terrible, terrible news. And so I watch every day, and what it reminds me of is when I was in 8th grade, I was at Wanamassa Grammar School, where there were 3,000 people in the community, and Asbury Park had 25,000 people. And so we were graduating from Wanamassa, where we had 40 kids in our class, 2 classes of 20, going into Asbury Park High School, where there's 2,000 kids, 500 kids in a class. And the teacher tells us, the guidance counselor comes in to give us a lecture. And what the guidance counselor says, his name, and my friend Alan Levine, so what I remember is that the lecture he gives us is that believe nothing that you hear and half of what you see. Nothing that you hear and half of what you see. I said, Alan, do you remember that? He says, yeah, he was my homeroom teacher. I remember that. And so that's the whole point. So imagine that when I'm in 8th grade, that's the thing that sticks in my head.
So don't worry about the headlines.
Yes.
So you're not worried about inflation, concerns about the potential for war, geopolitical issues with China, with Ukraine and Russia, any of those things at this point? You're just looking at what?
I believe that inflation will always persist and always has persisted, and it's a very large part of our economic model. So I think that inflation long-term is 4 or 5% a year. That's what you got to think about, 4 or 5% a year. That means that everything doubles in price every 14 or 15 years. Everything. It's tuition, it's labor, it's minimum wage, it's your car, it's your house, everything. And one of the good examples I have is I gave a whole bunch of examples in a chart, but you guys couldn't figure out how to show it as a chart. But one of them is my parents. I'm born in 1943. And my parents bought their first house, and we lived in a garage, on top of a garage in Bradley Beach. And then we bought our first house in 1948, 5 years later, and it was for $5,000 in Wanamassa. And then and we had that till 1955 when my parents sold it for $10,000, and they bought a $20,000 house, which is sold for $150,000. 10, 15, 20 years later. The bottom line is, I looked up on the internet what this house is worth. This house at 1122 Grassmere Avenue in Wanamassa, $529,000. So 100 times. That's 6.1% a year. And if I looked at the other house that they had, which was for $20,000, which is now worth $1 million something, that house is 5.1% a year. Everything you look at, state, tuition, cars, everything, 4 or 5% a year.
Tesla has been on a big run the last few months. It's up 115% so far in 2023, and our next guest is one of Tesla's biggest shareholders. Joining us right now in an exclusive interview is Ron Barron. He's the chairman and CEO of... All right, so what do you want to talk first? Do you want to talk the broader markets picture? Do you want to talk Tesla and the run-up of it?
One of the things I think is really important is that we don't worry about the stock market. We don't worry about interest rates, economy, what the government's going to do, wars. In my whole history, there's never been a good news year, with one exception, when they took down the wall in between East and West Germany. That's it, one good year for my whole career. And yet, the stock market in this whole period of time, with terror attacks and inflation and wars and pandemics, with all of that going on, the stock market is up 34 times since 1970 when I began my career. It was 1,000 then, it's now 34,000. And the economy, by the way, in that whole period of time is also up. It's up 33 times. It's gone from $800 billion of GDP to $26.25 billion. So despite all this stuff everyone talks about all day long and trying to figure out what's going to happen, market's up 33 times. And what I think is growth is now beginning to accelerate. And over the next 50 years, compared to the last 50 years, I think that you're going to have faster growth than 7%. But assuming that you get the same 7%, that means that you're going to have 35 times your money over the next 50 years, which means that the Dow Jones, which is now 34,000, will be 900,000. So when everyone talks about, well, is it going to be 32,000 or 33,000 or 30? I'm thinking about 900,000.
Why do you think faster growth over the next 50 years? Because there's a lot of people who think, let's say over the next 10 years, you could see much slower growth than 7%. I mean, that's been the concern for a long time.
Well, inflation is 4 or 5% of that 7% growth, and real growth has been 2%. And all the growth that's really happened in the world has taken place in the past 20, 30, 40 years. And that's accelerating because of technology.
Inflation, but you expect inflation to be higher too?
I expect inflation to be, as it always has been, as it has been in every single democracy that's ever existed, 4 or 5% a year. So I think everything is going to, be twice as expensive in 14 or 15 years as it is today. So it might touch down at 2 or 3%. But even Volcker, when he left in 1986 or 87, even then it was down to 3% from 18 or 19. We've gone from 9 or 9.5 to 4 or 4.5 or something like that. So maybe go a little bit lower, but it's not going to stay lower. And it's part of our economic program.
We want to get straight to our big guest this hour, Ron Barron. He is the chairman and CEO of Barron Capital. You know him well here. And Ron, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Thanks for inviting me.
We got a lot to talk about, but I think it's hard to not start with Elon Musk, because you have been a huge Elon Musk supporter, an investor in his companies for a very long time, a booster of everything he's doing. And yesterday, Walter Isaacson's book dropped on Elon Musk. So it's been in the headlines. It's been something people have been focused on. Walter himself will say, look, he's an incredible innovator, an incredible entrepreneur, but he has these demons that chase him. And the book lays this out in great detail, starting with his relationship with his father. What have you thought? I know you haven't had a chance to read it all. It's a big, long book. You just got it yesterday. But what do you think of the stories you've seen to this point that suggest Elon even knows these issues, he struggles with it, and can't quite get out of the way of being his own worst enemy? I mean, you've said that he is the key man. He's the reason you invest in these companies, and the biggest risk is if something were to happen to him.
So I met him in 2010, and it took me 4 years before we began to invest. In 2014 to 2016 is when we bought the stock. We made about 20 times on our investment there. And then in SpaceX, we've been investing in that since 2017. And we're one of the largest investors in SpaceX.
It's not a publicly traded company,
no,
but what about your valuation?
We have about $1.7 billion invested right now. Wow. It cost us $700 million. $400 million of that is me. On Tesla, we have 17.5 million shares. 4.5 million shares is me. So we've been an investor for a long time, so I obviously believe. Mm-hmm. And initially when we invested, it was making me crazy when I was seeing some of the things that he was doing, as much as I admired him. But I do think that, and I calmed myself down, and I said, I really deserve to make a lot of money by investing in this and by staying with it. And we deserve. And what I thought was that what the point that Walter made yesterday was that untethered, these things can happen, and if he was conventional, it would have never happened. So he's the guy who got us electric cars. He's the guy who got us to space. If he was a conventional person, he was on Saturday Night Live, and he said, hey, dude, do you think I'm a normal person? I got you electric cars, and I'm going to take you to Mars. Seriously, am I going to be normal? And he's a very funny, engaging, smart, incredibly hardworking person. And I don't remember. So one story. When I went to a dinner in East Hampton about 2-3 weeks ago, when David Rubenstein was interviewing Walter, and they sat me at the table with Walter right next to the stage, and then David interviewed him, and then they mentioned me 3 or 4 times in that, and then afterwards he said, Ron, the guy knows more than anyone else here about him. Why don't you say something? And I said, I can't say something. This is your show, and I'm not part of that. And
but you're here now, so what would you say?
Well, one fast story I agree with Walter. He has to be, untethered. And then in addition to that, when he was a child, he talked about all the problems he had with his dad. And he escaped from those. He would go home and he would read the encyclopedia. Read the encyclopedia. That was his nickname from his mom, encyclopedia. And any question he knew where. So he had a photographic memory. And what amazes me about him now is every time you ask him, how do you do that? How do you know that? How do you know what these things cost? He knows everything. It's a photographic memory. He remembers stuff. And so he's focused on cost, trying to drive cost out of everything. Everyone else tries to make as much money as they can. He's focused on his mission, long term, which is to make planet habitable, and then also to something bad happens to be able to keep humanity alive.